The recent talks between the United States and Russia in Riyadh have signaled a potential shift in the dynamics surrounding the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. These talks, held against the backdrop of continued fighting and escalating tensions, represent the most significant diplomatic engagement between the two superpowers since the beginning of the conflict. While the talks did not result in a concrete breakthrough, they did offer a glimmer of hope for a negotiated settlement. The meeting in Riyadh, hosted by Saudi Arabia, brought together high-ranking officials from both sides, including U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The presence of these key figures underscored the seriousness with which both Washington and Moscow are approaching these discussions. The fact that the talks took place at all, despite the deep mistrust and animosity that has characterized U.S.-Russia relations in recent years, is itself a noteworthy development. It suggests a willingness on both sides to at least explore the possibility of a diplomatic solution, even as the military conflict continues unabated. The choice of Riyadh as a neutral venue for the talks further highlights the delicate nature of the situation. The fact that Saudi Arabia, a country with close ties to both the U.S. and Russia, was chosen as the host, speaks to the complexity of the geopolitical landscape in which these talks are taking place. The talks in Riyadh were not intended to produce a final agreement but rather to lay the groundwork for further negotiations. The goal was to establish a framework for dialogue and to identify areas of potential common ground. In this sense, the talks can be seen as a first step in a long and arduous process. Whether this process will ultimately lead to a lasting peace in Ukraine remains to be seen. However, the very fact that these talks took place represents a significant development in the ongoing saga of the conflict. The talks in Riyadh resulted in an agreement on 4 key principles that will guide future negotiations. These principles include the re-establishment of embassies in both Moscow and Washington, a move aimed at restoring diplomatic channels that had been severed since the start of the conflict. Additionally, both sides agreed to the appointment of a high-level U.S. team tasked with negotiating an end to the conflict. This signifies a more focused and direct approach by the Biden administration to resolve the crisis. Furthermore, the two countries committed to engaging in discussions regarding geopolitical and economic cooperation. This suggests a recognition that the current state of affairs is untenable, and that finding ways to coexist peacefully is in the best interests of both nations. Lastly, both parties emphasized the need to ensure productive progress in future negotiations. This underscores the understanding that concrete results are needed to build trust and move toward a resolution. However, despite these positive steps, the Riyadh talks were not without their share of controversy. The most notable point of contention was the exclusion of Ukraine from the negotiating table. This decision, made by the US and Russia, has been met with sharp criticism from Kyiv and other European capitals. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed his disappointment and frustration over being sidelined in discussions that directly impact the future of his country. He reiterated Ukraine's stance that any agreement negotiated without its direct involvement would be unacceptable. President Zelensky's firm stance underscores the complexities of the situation. While the US and Russia may be eager to find a way out of the quagmire in Ukraine, they cannot simply dictate terms to Kyiv. Ukraine is a sovereign nation, and has made it clear that it will not be bullied into accepting a deal that compromises its core interests. Zelensky's defiance highlights the delicate balancing act that the US faces. Washington wants to support its Ukrainian ally, but also recognizes the need to find a resolution that averts a wider conflict with Russia. This dilemma is at the heart of the current impasse. Meanwhile, Russia has outlined its demands for a settlement, which include significant concessions from Ukraine. Moscow insists on Ukrainian neutrality, effectively barring it from joining NATO. This demand strikes at the heart of the conflict as Russia views NATO expansion as a direct threat to its security interests. Additionally, Russia is demanding territorial concessions from Ukraine, including the recognition of Crimea as Russian territory and the granting of autonomy to the Donbas region. These demands are non-starters for Kiev and have been met with unwavering resistance from the Ukrainian government and people. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has far-reaching geopolitical implications. It has exposed the fault lines in the international order and highlighted the challenges of managing relations between major powers in an increasingly multipolar world. The conflict has also had a profound impact on Europe, shattering the continent's sense of security and leading to a significant increase in defense spending among NATO members. The war has also exacerbated existing tensions between Russia and the West, pushing relations to their lowest point since the Cold War. Adding another layer of complexity to the situation is the potential role of former U.S. President Donald Trump. Current U.S. officials have hinted at Trump's possible involvement in brokering a peace deal. Secretary of State Rubio has even gone so far as to suggest that only Trump possesses the necessary skills and experience to bring both sides together. Whether Trump will actually play a role in future negotiations remains to be seen. However, the fact that his name is even being mentioned underscores the high stakes involved and the desperation to find a way out of this crisis. As the fighting in Ukraine continues, the world watches with bated breath, hoping for a diplomatic solution that can prevent further bloodshed and avert a wider conflagration. The talks in Riyadh, while far from a definitive solution, represent a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape. Whether this glimmer can be fanned into a flame of peace remains to be seen.